So thank you very much, Sudipto, Rudrani. Very happy to be here. And I am meeting Dr. Kavita Rao after a long time. I was telling her how I met her brother recently. We know each other for maybe close to 3 decades or whatever is. So very happy indeed to be here. This session, I won't give any initial comments, but of course, very important. But at the same time, due to conceptual issues, due to data issues, somewhat it is difficult to see the trend in a year. Although we have PLFS data annually and for urban areas quarterly. And of course, CMI data, we have high frequency data. I do not know much about CMI, but PLFS, I have some knowledge and we have been doing work. Ravi had earlier done some work on CMI also. I don't know what Rudrani is going to talk because she sent something, some PPT in the morning. I took a print around 12 o'clock and carried it. I have not gone through. But whatever comments I have, in any case, my colleague Ravi is here, so he will discuss. So without wasting much time, may I invite Rudrani to make her presentation. You have a long presentation. I don't know how in 20 minutes you can do it.
Of the discussion in this session is the employment and unemployment story of India. So the talk is organized in the following way: the background of the debate, the objective of the study, then the analysis and the main takeaways. I try to be short for this thing. So India has gone through a number of structural and policy shocks. Huh? Who? Yes. No, you could hear. Now is it audible?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So for the during the past decade, the Indian economy has gone through quite a number of structural and policy shocks, and some source of some of the shocks are from are global, not other sources are not particularly domestic. During the first half of the decade, the GDP growth of India increased from 5.2% to 8.3% secularly, and after 2016-17 it started declining, and during just before the COVID it was 3.9%. So there are a lot of reasons are highlighted in the literature for this secular decline, and some of there's a negative productivity shock, there is savings and investment rate decline. Our domestic policy like demonetization, GST had negatively impacted our activities, and there is a global uncertainties also. During this period, there is a tension, US-China tension, which affected both the imports of intermediates and the exports. So the manufacturing sector particularly hit by both demand and supply negative shocks. So these were the reasons. And then we are hit by the pandemic shock and had the great contraction of 2020-21, followed by a rise, as it's shown in the in this graph, that we declined by 6%, we contracted by 6% and then increased by around 9.7%, mainly driven by the base effect. The effect started fading away But again, we see in 23-24, there's a rise in growth, and we have already discussed in our morning session that this rise in growth was mainly driven by the capital accumulation from the public side. So now, okay, so given this, the overall activity of the economy, so was the how the other indicator of economic activity, which is employment, behaved during this period, during this whole decade. So official statistics showed that there is some deceleration during the growth deceleration after 26-27 in the labor force participation rate, both for male and female. But surprisingly, from 2019-20, we see that LFPR started rising, and in 2021, when there was the COVID shock impacted, we do not see any effect on it, and it's still rising, and it's almost to catch up. The male labor force participation rate is almost to catch up the pre 2011-12 rate. So if we look at the employment rate, or in PLFS is the worker population ratio. So again, we see that there is a similar increase since from so during 2017-18 to 2018-19, it was very mild change. But after that, there is a secular increase in the employment rate, and there is a secular decline in the unemployment rate. So all the labor indicators, labor market indicators show doing better off during the period when we are having deceleration in growth, and also during the COVID, when we had so much of negative impact that that our economy was hit. So how the recent quarterly report of PLFS, which is for October to December 2023-24, it shows that there are improvement in the indicators further in compared to the same quarter of the previous year during in 2023-24. But one okay, and before going to the to understand what happened to the employment during this whole decade, so there is a recent report by India Institute of Human Development and ILO has come up with, and mainly focused on the structural transformation that happened through the economy, which explains this the other way around movement in employment indicators when growth was moving in the other direction. So employment from agriculture, that the people who were living agriculture was mainly absorbed in the construction sector, and we also see in our previous session from Radhika's presentation that construction has a it started becoming one of the major activities in the economy, and the workers from agriculture are actually absorbed into this sector. And manufacturing had a low growth. So this is the pre-COVID story. So there is a manufacturing had a mild decline, and there is a stable services growth. After from the COVID to post-COVID period, the shift in employment was mainly into the agriculture, construction, and little bit of recovery in manufacturing, but the services employment remained mild. Employment growth remained mild. However, most important thing is that in this, if we look at the category of, or the occupational category of employment, is this rise in employment was during this period of time, was this post-pandemic period was mainly women's self-employment in unpaid family work, and that's a subsistence activity, and which is not a properly market-oriented paid job. So that explains to some extent the trajectory of the employment indicators. Now, given this background and the recent improvement that we see in the labor market indicators in PLFS, is one issue is that this recent evidence are mainly from urban sector, because the PLFS quarterly data is based on it's a panel survey, is basically urban. It doesn't take into account the rural. So in order to have a broader trend, to look at the broader trend overall India, both urban and rural, we decided to do a broad-based analysis for the using the CMI CPH's databases. So I'm not going to go through what it is about, only that it's like 1.7 lakh sample household living in that, and it's like 1.1 lakh urban and 63,000 rural. So that's basically that comprises the sample. Now, if we look at the trends, so what we see that there is so it is the quarterly data for both urban and rural. So at the overall level, we see that after the deterioration during the lockdown period, it improved and then remained stable for a long period of time till 2023. Then improved a little bit, both LFP, all LFPR employment rate and LFPR and employment rate, it improved, but still not to the level of the pre-COVID period. Also, unemployment rate, although it declined in 23-24 during the in the last quarter, in March quarter, but it is still not at the not down at the level of the pre-COVID period. So, although there is some improvement we see, but we are not back to the pre-COVID scenario. So from here, so what we see is that employment rate that that increased from 36%. So the overall employment rate sharply declined from 39.4% in the pre-COVID year to 36% in the COVID year, and remained stable there till 22-23, and it improved to 37.2% in 23-24. Overall labor force participation remained stagnant, and unemployment actually it deteriorated in 23-24. So where the official statistics showing improvement, the CMI data shows that the unemployment rate in this 23-24 has deteriorated, and we can see that in this period, actually, we have both increase in the growth of employed persons as well as growth in the unemployed persons. So this shows that since the second quarter of 22-23, there was secular increase in the growth in the number of people employed overall. Sorry. And but if we look at the unemployed, number of people unemployed, the growth in it also increased till only in the last 2 quarters of 22-23 it declined. So both the positive and negative effect from increasing employment growth and increasing unemployment growth kept the labor force participation rate stagnant, because by definition labor force participation is the number of employed persons plus number of unemployed persons divided by the population, so working age population. So we see that both that positive and negative things are happening if we look at the growth rate of the employed and unemployed. So and in this and then what drives in which sector contributes mainly to this employment growth is agriculture again. So this is again corroborates to the official statistics findings that most of the increase in employment recent increase in employment or improvement in the labor market indicators are into the agricultural sector, rural sector. So that we see that where the manufacturing and services, industry and services have declined, the share of employment in these two sectors, the share of employment in agriculture has increased. And that is the sole driving force behind increasing employment growth. We also see that there was this occupational shift between from the small traders and wage laborers to the farming. So from non-farm to farmers, if we take that small traders and wage laborers and farmers and agriculture all in a like an informal sector, because agriculture is mainly informal and these small traders, wage laborers also informal. So if we take this as an informal sector, this gray and yellow chunk as the informal sector, so we see there is a shift was happening since 2026-27 from non-farm to farm. So where this non-farm activity had the highest share, it declined by 2019-20, and during the COVID, farmers became the highest. The share of farmers became the highest chunk, and after that, in the recent period, it declined little bit, but still that remains the same way. So where where the salaried persons, which the share of this the employed people in salaried occupation, that remained almost the same. It is there is a shift of non-farm to farm within the informal sector, and where the formal business has grown. So this is how the occupational shifts has taken place during this period, over this decade or 5 years. Now, looking at the male and female disparity, so the employment rate for male are much higher than female. So there is a gender disparity. We see a big gender disparity in labor force participation rate as well, and unemployment rate also. So unemployment rate for female is double than male. Now, more interesting differences coming for the urban and rural. So, employment rate for urban versus rural. So the employment rate for urban sector is much lower, significantly lower than the rural, and similarly for LFPR as well. So there can be many reasons. So some of the highlighted reasons in the literature are like you cannot distinguish between actual employment and disguised unemployment in rural sector, so which gives rise to the larger number of rural employment. And institutionally set urban wages are set higher than the market clearing level, which also leads to a lower number for employed people in urban sector. So this we see, we observe, and the one MG NREGS particularly plays a role to MG NREGS. So what is the message coming from? MG NREGS plays a role in the increase in rural employment numbers significantly during the COVID and the post-COVID period. There is a very sharp rise in number of persons employed under MG NREGS, and that. What happened? Close the box. So there is a sharp rise in employment under this scheme, and that remained high after post COVID as well. Sorry. we see unemployment rate for rural sector is also lower. Now, now if we look at the behavior of urban male and rural male and the urban female and rural female, what we see is that both in both urban and rural sector, the male employment had behaved similarly, in a similar way, whereas the female employment behaved in a very different way. Sorry. So during the initial decline during the lockdown, the urban female employment immediately was declining. It was continued to decline, whereas the rural employment, female employment increased. So it went to the opposite direction. And in a much later period, they both started declining, and then again they started increasing in the recent years, like end of 22-23 to the current year. So again, we see that MGNREGA plays a important role in employment of female workers, because the yellow bar shows a much higher number than the male, the gray one, the gray bars, the male workers. And so the rural employment for female workers have actually on a large part of it is on account of MGNREGA. So again, it also the finding from CMI data is also kind of supporting the official statistics that the rise in employment that was in the agricultural sector, in the rural sector, and for the rural, mainly rural female, and also that's not in a wage-based, market-oriented jobs, but in subsidiary subsistence activities. Now, a little bit on the youth employment. So we observed that the employment rate improved in 23-24 compared to 22-23 for all age groups among youth in urban areas. So that's from 15 to ages of 15 to 29 years. Whereas in the rural sector, it was post-COVID, it improved, but after that it started declining for the highest age group within this within the age group of youth. So the rural and urban employment behavior for the highest age group in the youth, that is 25 to 29 years, is showing to behave differently, whereas the other two are behaving in the similar way, the 15 to 19 and 20 to 24 years. So that's basically our observations from this quarterly database. And so the main takeaways from this short presentation is that the labor force participation rate and employment rate both have improved, but not yet to catch up to the pre-COVID level. Unemployment rate deteriorated in the current year, and that's due to both because of the increase in number of growth in the unemployment, increase in the growth in the number of unemployed people. So it's not like, because the unemployment rate is defined as the number of people unemployed divided by number of people employed plus unemployed. So it is not because of that, it is not increasing, not because that employed people are declining, employed people are increasing, but again the unemployed people are also increasing. So that's why its unemployment rate is deteriorating. Yeah, and agriculture solely explain the rising rising employment growth. We find the occupational transition from non-farm to farm sectors, and in this shifting from farm to non-farm to farm sector, MGNREGA plays an important role, and particularly for the female workers. So that's our aim.
Yeah, Thank you, Rudrani, for making the presentation in time, although it is quite comprehensive. So, Ravi, your turn now.
Thank you, Rudrani, for a very exhaustive presentation in really a short period of time. Employment is a very troublesome concept to work with. Long ago in the Indian context, Professor Lagdawala's committee gave four different concepts of employment, and they were all complementary to each other. They all supplemented each other in one way or another. The PLFS then shifted mainly to the current weekly status of, looking at current weekly status, whereas in our report, the ISD ILO report, we use the usual status definition of employment. Now, first of all, the question is for a country like India, for a developing country like India, which is the more relevant concept, which is a relevant concept when we're particularly looking at it from the macroeconomic perspective. What is the concept of employment which is relevant to us? In a country where a lot of people work at very low levels of quality and very low levels of remuneration, or even without remuneration, what is the concept of employment which is relevant? Long ago, when I was in the National Commission for Enterprises in the unorganized sector, Professor Krishnamurthy wrote a paper for us where he argued that a combination of the current weekly status and daily status, it's a very good occasional paper, and if you haven't looked at it, some of you might like to look at it, would capture underemployment as well as unemployment most accurately for a country like India. But that question, I think, still remains open, but particularly because many of us argue that we should be looking at macroeconomic developments and growth from an employment lens rather than the other way around. And if you want to do that, then what is the employment lens that we choose to look at growth from becomes very relevant. And this is actually, in the context of the recent PLFS data, where we find a surge in employment of certain kind, these issues become all the more relevant because there is clearly a disjuncture between the employment surge and output growth over this period of time structurally. And you mentioned some of our conclusions also from the report in this context. I think this is something which we have to tussle with, but we also have to tussle with in the context of using both sources of data, PLFS and CMIE. And yeah, how comparable they are, and I'll come to that a little bit. As far as your coverage of the PLFS is concerned, it's pretty straightforward. The story is pretty straightforward. Instead, paradoxically, and we have called it a paradox in our report, post-COVID, and in fact, actually, the slow turnaround started in the pre-COVID year, in 2017-18. We find an increase in employment rate, we find an increase in the labor force participation rate, and we also find a slow decline in the unemployment rate. Now, of course, there are reasons for unemployment could have peaked in 2016, 17 or 17, 18 because of various policy shocks that you mentioned. But nonetheless, why this trend continued through COVID is still an issue, I think, which we need to delve into. And you mentioned all the relevant points. There is one mistake, I think, in one of the graphs which you should possibly look at. If you can just put the graph on employment rate back on the screen. I think this probably you will be able to, yes, the overall employment rate, not CMI, but the PLFS employment rate. Yeah, I think, yeah, is this one? Yeah. So the 2011-12 figures are wrong. It should be about 80% and 35%. Somehow you got them wrong. This is something you can correct. Now, beyond that, most of your analysis is actually confined to the CMIE. Now, there are two broad sets of issues when we look at the CMIE, or rather three broad sets of issues. One is the methodological issues underlying the CMIE, which is the sampling issues, sampling frame, survey design, and all those issues. And these have been captured very well in a couple of papers, one by J. Simpias and his colleague, the other by Jean Drees, etc. And they're very well captured. But the other set of issues are really just the concept of unemployment which is used in the CMIE, because basically it uses a single day's datum. And the question is really with respect to whether you did a job the previous day. Of course, the concepts have also undergone some changes over a period of time. So also have measurement issues in the CMI. Both have undergone changes over a period of time. But it's basically a single day datum which is used in the CMI, and it's a datum of whether you did any job on the previous day. Maybe it's the way this question is framed, because of which consistently from 2016-17 onwards, the CMI always reports a lower employment participation rate and a lower labor force participation rate than the corresponding PLFS figures. But what is, of course, more significant, and this is the third point I wanted to make with respect to the CMI, is that the divergent trends. With respect to the PLFS, we are all sort of covered under this whole mountain of increasing employment, since 2016-17. I mean, huge figures, right? Close to almost 80 million workers added to the workforce over this period of time. Most of them, 2/3 of them basically unpaid, 2/3 of them. It's a thumb rule of 2/3 really, unpaid family workers in agriculture and so on. Although non-agriculture, as you pointed out, also grew at about 2.6% over this period. Non-farm employment also grew, which was slightly higher than the 2.2% rate of growth which was observed in the 2012 to 2017 period. So that is there. Now this is so basically, on the one hand, you have the PLFS saying that there has been this very significant upsurge in employment of a certain kind, and then you have the CMI arguing that actually the labor indicators have remained below the pro-COVID levels, still below, despite the small tail end increase that you notice for 23-24 in employment ratio and in labor force participation rate. And the problem with us is that how do you reconcile this? How do you reconcile two very picture? Because the CMI gives you a picture of a very dampened labor market, which says that full recovery has not happened. Whereas a detailed analysis of PLFS shows a mixed labor market, recovery in some aspects, a non-recovery, or let's say a pushback in some aspects because of the increase in family labor, unpaid labor, agricultural labor, and so on and so forth. Now, which of this is really the correct picture? Can we validate it externally using something else? I mean, one way of looking at it is looking at wage behavior and seeing if wage behavior provides a partial indicator. Wages have been very muted. Wage growth has been very muted, but all the way from 2011-12 onwards. And that continues to be the case in recent years if you use PLFS data. Of course, as far as regular wages are concerned, regular wages have in fact been far more muted. In fact, they show declines. Real wages show a decline over most periods of time, whereas casual wages in fact show a small increase. So it seems that is it consistent? I mean, are both these data sets, if we analyze them any further, are there some segments of the labor market we see some slight labor market tightening, consistent with the slight increase that we see in casual labor wages, in agricultural wages, for example? Because it's again a very paradoxical situation that on the one hand you have this agricultural rate, enormous increase in agricultural employment and self-employment. But on the other hand, casual wages have been showing some increase, at least as far as. So I don't know. I don't have an answer for this, but sure. Yeah, it will be lovely to have a discussion on this. I don't have a clear answer, but we need some external validation because the CMI and the PLFS diverge very significantly, and that's this thing. So that's a very Just one more point. I know we are short of time. There are 2 points, which is, I think, your bullet points 4 and 5. I was not very sure that your data shows this. Maybe you have some more detailed data to show them. Number one, you show that the increase in employment was exclusively due to agriculture. So you have one graph which shows the shares, and there the shares, it is the service sector shares which show an increase, not agriculture. And that is only in terms of shares, whereas that bullet point actually relates to presumably to absolute levels of employment. So maybe you have some data, at the back of it, but it doesn't show up. If you look at the graph of shares, you see it's the gray bar, the gray line, which is service sector, which is going up, whereas agriculture sector is not. So it's just not entirely consistent with only agriculture sector contributing to employment growth. This is CMI. Actually, apart from the initial presentation, the rest of it is all in CMI data. And similarly, also the non-farm to farm growth, so-called structural retrogression in employment. Again, it's not very clear to me that your 4 pies, two in the earlier, 2 in 1 covering 2016, 17, and 19, 20. And then the second one covering 2021 and 2020, the thing whether they show similar, because actually the changes in the second pie is in the opposite direction. Second set of pies is in the opposite direction than the first. So I'm not very sure that whether they consistently show an occupational shift in the direction that you're mentioning. In any case, the occupational grouping in this is very confusing, because the labor component actually covers both agriculture and non-agriculture. It's only the farmers who are agriculture related. So it's not very clear to me. So these conclusions that I think need to, and just a small clarificatory point, which is that are the years the same? I mean, because the CMI data is over 3 quarters every year. January to April, and then May to August, and then September to December. So it's not very clear to me what is the period over which you've taken these years in the CMI data, whether it's May to April, or whether it's September to August. No, quarters are defined over January to April. May to this thing, but you also have annual data in this. You've also given annual data as well as quarterly data. No, but for example, this data can't be quarterly data. I know. But the question I'm asking is, what is the end period of the annual data? Yeah. Not April, yeah. So I'm asking you because the coverage becomes different. Well, that's the same. How are you analyzing the CMI quarterly?
So it is April to March.
No, April to March is not possible. It can only be May to April.
So there are 3 waves.
There are 3 waves. There are 3 waves covering 4 months each. Okay. So I'll just stop here. I want to be some time for discussion.
Thank you, Ravi, for your very useful comments. We have some 10-15 minutes for discussion. I won't take much time, just to put some points for discussion. Ravi started with, and in Rudrani's presentation also, this entire concept of employment. I would add to that, in a developing country like India, although we are not at the lowest level, now lower middle income country, but still a developing country, overall unemployment rate in India is less than 4%. In developed countries, we find much higher, European countries. And as very famously said that in a poor country, people can't afford to be unemployed. Everybody works. There is always shift between casual employment to self-employment and vice versa. So whether my advice will be not to take just total unemployment. Just think of total unemployment in India is, according to PFS, I'm not going to that, just less than 4%. But youth unemployment rate is 10%. Educated or youth unemployment is, which is the central. By the way, educated youth unemployment constitutes 2/3 of the total unemployment. So, in my view, if we want to capture the reality of unemployment or labor market, youth unemployment or educated unemployment, it is rising. It is constituting maybe 20, 30 years back, youth unemployment, educated unemployment constituted only 30%. Now it is 69%. So this is one. The other is whether from this reversal to agriculture, whether it is transitory or going to last for some time, because very difficult to where the land holding is so small to sustain agriculture and provide employment. Just to give you one example, during 19 to 22, rate of growth of employment in agriculture was 9%. GFA growth was less than 5%. Means agricultural labor productivity significantly decreased. So quality of employment, and as Ravi said, so I think in a country like India or any developing country, wage growth, particularly casual wage growth, and by the way, casual wage growth has taken place during even, and this is a paradox, in pandemic year also. It is quite modest, but quite significant. It might have contributed to the decline in force. This is one. And then, as Ravi said, reconciling this CMI, unemployment rate less than 4% by PLFS, CMI close to 9%, occupational category you mentioned, wage labor should be also casual. A salaried wage worker, a high paid wage worker is not the same. So all these categories, how to reconcile. But otherwise, of course, female employment story is very different. Again, going to self-employment. So quality of employment, unless until you take over and categorize the